Thank you, David. What a real honor and opportunity it is for me today. David came up to me earlier and asked how to pronounce my last name, and I said, don't worry about that, because today, all of you know me as John, but today I'm going to speak as I do in my permaculture communities, which are, by the way, a lot younger than this group, and I feel honored because, amongst all this age and wisdom, I'm like a youth. Is how I feel. But in those groups, they call me Tatatswana. And Tatatswana means the peacemaker. It was given to me by one of my clan uncles after I had this vision quest. And so that's how they address me, and this is how I'm going to speak to you today. So my grandmother, when I would go visit her, she would always say to me, we would line up. I came from a family of 12, but usually when we went to go visit my grandmother, it'd be like 10. And we would all line up. And she would greet us. But when it came to me, she would always say, Navi. And years later, they made the movie Avatar, and one of the words that was pronounced in that movie was Navi. And I found out years later that my grandmother, who was always in her thoughts, that whenever I appeared to her, she knew that I was real, that I was present in her, and that she knew all that I had been experiencing, and up to the point where I had polio when I was a little boy, so I spent some numbers of years in the hospital. And she never came to visit me. But one day we were talking, and she was telling me how much she loved me. I was no good. And I said, well, if you love me, why don't you come see me? And that woman described the room, what I had been experiencing in that room was good and bad things. But that's when that word Navi really came alive in me. So, Navi, I see you all. And so I would like to begin this conversation with a prayer. And it's a prayer that all beings can do. In indigenous communities, we honor all beings. So in this prayer, even a child could honor. And so it's called a life breath. And again, I learned this from my grandmother. And my grandmother taught me that our first breath when we're born as a child is tawa, or God's essence, being blown into us. And so just stay seated. But what I would love for you to do is to imagine that you're a young tree, and to push your roots deep and deeper, as that song was saying, deeper and deeper into the earth, and ground yourself to the earth. And what I would love for you to do is take a deep breath. Feel it in your abdomen, and exhale. And that's the prayer. So the other thing I would like to do is this grounding, is that we're taught in our communities, the permaculture community, that the world is sacred. And we all know that if it was, well, we'd be in a much more beautiful environment. And so what I tell them is that if you honor Mother, or if you honor your life experience, that's where it's sacred. So I just want to thank you for all of you, as I thank my feet wherever they take me, what I call my path, is that they brought you or to this place now, to where what makes it sacred is your will and your choice to be here. So I thank you for that. So what I'm going to be doing today is actually just planting a seed, or since I'm a gardener, pulling out a weed. When I plant a seed, I plant with expectation and abundance. One year I had a neighbor and he had this beautiful garden, and I thought, man, I want my garden to look like that. And guess what? My garden looked like that. But I only had one squash. I had planted everything. Everything was blooming. It was beautiful, but only one squash. And that's when I started planting with abundance. So this is what I plant with. And the other thing a gardener does is pulls out the weeds, or I call them invasives, because weeds to me is a little bit too mean on them. So even when I pull those weeds, I say that we all have a place, and unfortunately yours isn't here. But I don't take that weed and throw it away and burn it. I lay it right where I put it, because I figure it's taking all the good nutrients and stuff from the garden, and so I let it regenerate right where I pull it. And I also don't pull it after 10 o'clock, because I've learned that when I was working on the East Wetlands project, we used to have to pull out all these invasives. And by like 10 o'clock, it got harder to pull the weeds. And so I figured I was being too rough on them. So I just want you to know, if I say anything that might question what you believe, just know that it's tender, and it's with love, and it's with compassion. So I'm going to talk on three topics about this Christ consciousness, which I've come to know in my life as basic human nature. And our generation, which I'm on the tail end of it, has probably the last generation that understands what the real essence of community is and service. In the permaculture groups, this is what we have to teach these young kids, young adults, of giving back, and of knowing that you have a place, and that you bring something to the world. That you're just not here for the material wealth or whatever you're striving for, that everything comes with a price. So one of the things I've always experienced, and I'm going to speak about, this person of John. Now, John came into this world with a lot of problems. When I was born, my aunties gathered around me and said, this little boy here, they called me the man with many wives. And what they were saying is that I had many lives before as well. And that that I would have a problem with this experience of romance. So the one that focused a lot of time and energy on me was my grandmother, and this is why I speak of her a lot. But she taught me that the topic I'm talking on right now is called surrender. Is that along with this problem with relationship came a problem of health. A young boy had polio, and I just a lot of things. Always health issues. And when I had polio, I was locked in literally this cage that was stacked 3 high. And so in my mind, I escaped from that. The only time I got out of that was physical therapy, or that was it. So for 3 years, we were in this cage. And so my mind developed this escape. And what I did when I got out of that cage and braces, nothing could hold me back. I did everything you were supposed to do. And I got into a lot of trouble. And some of those actions caused extra harm to myself, or physical harm to myself as well. The last time I had a big issue was 16 months ago. I had a stroke down on the river. I was doing some artwork, working on a stone, and I had this big event that was coming up for the summer, again in a permaculture group. Finally being recognized as one of the biggest wildcrafting schools. And it was 2 months of very intensive instruction with these children. And it was a great honor. And so I stopped here in Yuma to let my family know what I was doing. At the time I was doing some time in New Mexico. And I had this stroke along the river. And luckily what happened was I had this appointment to go get some pain pills. I suffer from chronic pain. And luckily I was right by the hospital, took care of everything I could do to get to this hospital. And but what was different with this event was I wasn't doing anything wrong. You know, I was doing this artwork that was going to help support my transportation costs and all this kind of stuff. Why did this happen? I wasn't doing anything wrong. And this is when I learned about surrender. Was that all my life I had this anger and resentment to the medical profession. And needless to say, most of my relationships were with doctors or nurses, you know. And so I had this real, the word that comes to me is a hard-on. I just hated them. I just hated to go, I even hated to take the pain pills. But this time I decided just to let it go. I knew in my mind, and in that presence, there was nothing I had done to create this. It just happened. And so I let it go. And I just said to Tawa, God, by the way, Tawa in my language means the majestic one, or the majesty, no gender. And so I said, whatever is going to come to me, then I'll just let it come to me. And I bow to it. So whatever it takes. And mind you, I had this big vision of going to this big wildcrafting course, instruction. And by doing that, that stroke literally changed my life. Everything happened in sequence of getting to the doctor, a certain amount of time they got to inject this blood thinner in you. Everything was in sequence. In that stroke, they were taking x-rays of me, and the x-ray technician was like her third patient. It was big for her. And so she overshot because she wanted to make sure she got the right x-rays. And what she did is she found out, they found out that I had compressed discs. And so that led to an operation like 3 days, 4 days after the stroke. But to the doctor, to the hospital, to the flight, the plane that flew out of Flagstaff because there was a big thunderstorm happening, and everything. These guys were like angels. They normally they take you just to the airport. No, they wanted to make sure they walked me into the room. Everything. The doctor I got, the best in the Southwest. The nurses were saying to me, man, what kind of health insurance do you have? Because this guy is great. This is the best guy. And so in that surrender, I said, okay, well, I still have an objective to do. It might not be the wildcrafting, but what do you want me to do? And so then I, by choice and will, started thinking about some of the things I wanted to do. And the morning of the operation, the surgeon comes into the room and assures me everything is going to go good, and says, you mind if I pray for you? And I go, well, I'm a praying man. And so this surgeon prayed for everything that I was thinking. He looks out the window and he just prays this prayer exactly to what I wanted to do after I got out of this operation. And was like a 98.5% that I would struggle with, even with having this operation on my neck. He comes the next day and checks me out. He saw movement. I didn't. His staff didn't, but he did. You're going to be fine. And so that's what I learned to surrender. When we surrender, we allow an intervention. Now, I realize that a lot of us, we're grown and instructed about shame, blame, guilt, and all those other words. After I surrendered that, knowing that there was everything in my life was the way it should go, I thought. And I had worked a number of years to get to this place of being part of this instructing course. But it changed my life. I realized that this anger that I carried to the profession, the anger that I carried in my own self, was, as my grandmother said, you're not the first one to experience it, and you're not going to be the last, so don't own it. And so this is what I've learned about surrender. It allows an intervention. Could be friends, could be, in my case, it was just spirit energy. I just call it spirit surfing. I've heard songwriters, I write a little bit as well, but you know, there's always this mention of this music or these words just flowing past you, and somehow or the other you have the ability just to pull them out. And the words that came out after surrender the first word was gratitude. And that's the next topic I'm going to talk about, gratitude. And gratitude, I learned in my life, is to be present with your experience, to own it. To allow yourself, you know, what I call the mystery and magic of life to re-enter our psyche. Especially the way we are right now. You know, I have a very strong will. I realize that. But how am I going to honor that strong will? And some of the things I did in life when I was younger were I abused this strong will. I used it for my own personal advantage and such. But so now I honor that strong will to be, to be humbled enough to stand in front of you all. That's humbling enough. It's easier to speak to a younger generation. But there is no way in the world that, this is why I feel like a child speaking to you. There is no way in the world that I could even fathom, don't even want to fathom some of your life experiences. But that's what I realized about being grateful. My grandmother taught me the first prayer in the morning, was that light breath. And to be acceptance, to be grateful that you're alive, that the sun has come up again. When I was a little boy, we were taught, because later in life we were going to be farmers. I didn't know this, but my aunties would take us out early in the morning and have us sing to the sun, sing to the sunrise. And they would tell us that's because the sun might forget where it's supposed to come up, And as a kid, these are your aunties. Right? And you're out there and these aunties took care of you. I mean, some made better pies or this or that. So when a certain auntie asked you to do something, you went out and gave it your best. And of course, later on in life, when I was an adult, they would sit around and laugh at me because I would be the one out there that would be really singing. But that's what it taught me, to be grateful for that sunrise, to be grateful for that moment. And the other thing that gratitude has taught me is to end that day by allowing everything to cease so that you can wake up fresh again the next morning. We have a past, we certainly have a future. But all that we are really responsible for today is this day, the presence of the day. And these virtues are what I believe, and of course I've read the Bible, and Christ and other prophets and whatnot have basically one thing they all suffered from was that they were all the same. They all had that same human experience. But they also had this breath or this energy that was, I'll say, encoded in us nowadays. If in my craft, we study the law of nature. There are leaders. There are losers. There are stronger animals in that kingdom. And so genetically, these things change. And so I will only say that at one time, the way I was taught in my culture, in my clan, was that we were warriors. And I certainly exerted that spirit when I was younger. But there are other forms of battles as well. And this is why I speak, as Tatatswana, the peacemaker, because, that other past I realized was nothing to be who I was, not who I really was. The last virtue I want to speak of is trust. And I wrote, trust is to believe in that which we are willing to accept. And trust is also, I think, in bed with truth. And what I've learned these past years, year and a half actually, is that truth moves. There are certain belief systems that I've held, and they've brought me so far on this path in life. Some of them, most of it was dualistic. With duality comes, I'll just say right and wrong, good or bad. So I was very hard and judgmental on my spiritual walk. That it was out there somewhere, and that there was nowhere in this physical being that I could achieve this purest type of essence, to be at peace with who I am and my actions. But I learned that in that movement of truth, that if we bear it, and if we live it in that struggle, that when we let it go, that it only gets back into that flow of that river, and someone else gets to drink that which you've borne witness to. And I believe that it's empowered because we experienced it and lived it. All this is about our divine essence, our divine nature, that we are a light force and a life being of this greater consciousness, which is God the good. And so I think that that's what I'll hold for you all today. And I believe that if there are certain issues that you're going through in life, I tell the students there that it's only a season. This isn't forever. But to experience it, to hold it, to accept it, to honor it. And by the way, this takes practice. It takes a lot of work. Sometimes it takes work to smile. I mean, I'm in a lot of pain, and my grandchildren think I'm mad at them. And when they're home, luckily they're at school most of the day, but when they're, I mean, when they're gone at school, I mean, like, you know, hurting. But when they're home, I force myself to smile because I don't want them to think I'm mad at them, you know. So it takes work, and sometimes it's the simplest things. But what I do is that I only practice it on a daily basis. That's the other part of the Christ consciousness, is to be alive and present in who we are, and to know that we come from a greater source, a greater being, that we have an umbilical cord still attached to that consciousness. And so thank you. And I really appreciate you allowing me to speak before you. You know, I had, by the way, last Saturday, I fell and hurt myself and ended up going to the doctor Monday, and of course x-rays, and now they found this mass here. God. That so I have to surrender to as well, you know. So I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I just believe and pray that you take what you can, stir it around. I love that little recipe thing, because I'm a chef, one of my crafts, so I really embrace that, and also the song that we sang. I mean, I was almost crying. Because I practice an emotion of anger to its fullest form. And it is a little difficult for me to be emotional in tender moments. And so I'm so grateful that it all came together. And I love a curveball. And that's what kind of happened today, because I didn't get to meet with Lynn about what was going to happen. And so thank you for listening, and I just wish and bless abundance.
Thank you, John. We had a similar childhood, I'm hearing. Okay, let's all just sit back and relax. Plant your feet flat on the floor so you can feel them just root right through the foundation into the earth. Take a nice deep breath. And as you exhale, feel all of your muscles relax. Let it go. Even your shoulders droop a little bit as you relax. And that felt so good. Let's do it again. Another deep breath. Hold it in for a couple of seconds. And release it, allowing your shoulders to fall, and feel how relaxed that makes you feel. And now allow the divineness of all that is to fill your body, flowing through you easily and gently, filling you with love, with peace, with kindness. All that awakens the Christ consciousness within you, bringing you to the fullest truth of yourself. Relax in this place for a moment. And just simply be your feelings for a moment. Just be. And in that being, feel Spirit moving within you. Knowing Spirit is fully alive and at your beck and call. Any time. All the time. You are blessed. And so it is. And you may open your eyes and welcome back. And now we'll